Good, thank you so much. So I'm sharing my screen. Can you all see it? Yes, I can see, yes, thank you. We understand that after a long period of teaching online and through Zoom meetings, you want to go back to campus teaching and learning. But in this presentation, I will talk about why we think that you should still include videos in your educational program, what type of content is best to present on video, how you can do that, and how you can implement guidelines that stem from the educational sciences and learning sciences. And then Matthew will take over to talk about how you can do that yourself. But let's start with a little poll. I will, where I can't find my mouse. Oh, here it is. I'll start with a little poll to ask you, why would you include videos in your course, or why would you create video lectures? And you can give more than one answer. So do you do it to have a backup when we have another pandemic? Do you do it because you have too many students? Do you do it because you want more flexibility for yourself or maybe for the students? So I see all sorts of results coming in. And what I see now, I will share it, but I can only share it after everyone has voted. I can see that most of you, and I'm very happy for that, most of you want to do it. I'm waiting for the last one. Yes, I'm ending the poll. Oh, can I share it? I thought I could share it. Sorry.
But
yes.
You do.
Great.
Yes,
there's the results. Okay. It's a bit of a difficulty between me being co-host and being a host somebody else. So we see that most of you want to do it to give your students more flexibility. I'm very happy with that. But let me then continue on why we think that creating videos is good for your program. First and foremost, it improves learning outcomes. A very recent review of randomized trials, randomized studies, where different kinds of educational videos were compared to on-campus teaching methods, showed that when video was compared to in-classroom lectures, videos were actually a little better, with an impact value of 0.18. Now, that's not very high, I know, but educational interventions usually don't have a very high impact. But if we look at the difference between video and static materials, we see that we already get a little higher impact. So videos do really better than static materials that you give your students. And if you combine videos with on-campus lectures, then the impact is really great. And this is not because you add extra time, it's really because if you just have the same time but all on campus, or the same time with on campus and books, then adding video still has a much greater impact than any of the other interventions that you can do. So I urge you to read the review study. It's very nice reading. Videos really, on all sorts of videos, it is robust against the type of video, against the different settings, lectures, tutorials, different domains, in the sciences, in the languages. A very robust result that shows that video really adds value. So better learning experiences is one reason to include video. Another reason is that videos can create a more inclusive educational program, because when we use videos in education, we can offer more flexible learning, like many of you said, to our students. For example, students who have health problems, but also students who have jobs, or who go on internships, or who have other things that prevent them from coming to campus. And when we bring part of that education to the students at their home, we can use our campus for other educational activities, because we're definitely cramped for space. Now, the idea, what the expectation was that our student pool would grow from 2018 to 2037 with 21%. and that would already bring problems. But we saw last year that from 1 year to the next, our bachelor pool grew with 12%. So maybe we should somehow rethink our expectations on what is going to happen in 2037. Definitely, we will have a lot more students and we will definitely be cramped for space. So why? Clearly, we feel that videos should be integrated in education because it creates better and more inclusive learning. So for what type of learning content do we think that videos are most useful? Videos are especially good to show dynamic processes, transitions in dynamic processes, and special settings such as, labs that are not open for everybody, or details, very specific details of rare equipment that you want to show to your students. Like here, we can see a video of a dynamic process, the airflow from top to bottom, and the transition when you open the window. Very easy to show, very difficult to explain what that would look like. Here we see it again, the transition. But not only for demonstration and dynamic processes. Also, when you have difficult concepts to explain, the combination of visual and auditory explanations lowers the mental load for the learners when you're explaining these complex concepts. And thus, it will benefit their learning of your explanations. The multimodal benefit, so hearing and seeing, has been shown in many studies and is the result of an increase in the capacity of your working memory by using the auditory processor for language-based information, so all the words that I'm speaking, and the visual processor in your brain for the visual materials, such as objects or diagrams. However, we have to be careful with that. There is something like the expertise reversal effect. That is, if the students are already very familiar with certain concepts, then adding verbal explanations to graphical overviews, like here, could just increase the load, or adding visuals to verbal explanations where the learner can already picture it in his mind by himself could also increase the load. So this is the redundancy effect, and we will talk about it later in the workshop when we talk about slide design. Yes, let's continue. So demos, concepts, the combination of oral, auditory information and visual information, and that works really well for when you are discussing solutions to specific problems. And I'm talking about worked out examples that differ from giving solutions to exercises in the timing of the example. Just giving a solution after you've given students the exercise is not the idea of worked out examples. Worked out examples are given before the students start to work on their own examples. The idea is that if learners start too early with doing exercises themselves, they may end up applying wrong strategies for that. So it is better that you show them how to solve a problem, there's different strategies to solve that problem, and doing that in videos will really help their learning. Several studies even have shown that prolonging the worked out example phase. So if you have, here you see a typical lecture that has a concept, an example, and an exercise maybe afterwards. But if you, so the concept is your explanation, and then you show them how you solve typical problems, and then you let them do it themselves. If you prolong the example period, which does give them shorter time to exercise themselves, that even gives better results in learning than having them do exercises themselves. Here we see a typical example of solving. anyways, we'll not listen to him all the way through. But my idea showing you this is that this guy shows you the problem, then he starts to explain his solution, and he starts to explain why he applies that solution. And that is a really well worked out example that your students can use when they're learning the content. Well, now I have to go to the next. So to conclude, what content is really good to show in video lectures is dynamic processes, transitions, or special settings like the labs or the special equipment, complex new information that you want to provide your students that really benefits from the combination of auditory information and visual information, and worked out solutions that are given before students start working on their own exercises. Now I want to go in a little more detail about how you should develop your video lectures. First, what I want to do is I want to have you watch 2 videos after one another. Both videos are about 1 minute. I'll start them. We all watch the same at the same time. And afterwards, I want to ask you to rank the videos in terms of educational value, in terms of technical quality, and in terms of engagement, level of engagement. Now, I took excerpts just from the videos, so you might not understand everything they're talking about, but just to give you an idea of 2 very different videos.
What was the role of this puzzle piece? Yeah, for starting things. So for the main part of your program to kick off, you have to attach it to this when green flag clicks puzzle piece. And we're going to see in C that it's not nearly as straightforward, but it's something that you can just kind of copy paste for now. And within a few days, will this make more sense character by character, int, main, void, and then this open curly brace, as it's called, followed by this closed curly brace, suggests that all the code that we're going to write today onward is going to go between those 2 curly braces, as opposed to underneath a puzzle piece like this.
To draw a circle,
And next
use
one.
the ellipse command. So I'll type ellipse in this editor. After I write a command name in a program, I always follow it with parentheses and a semicolon. But I don't see an ellipse. The right side is still that boring white canvas. Well, there's no ellipse yet because I need to give more information about where to draw the ellipse and what size it should be. Since I am drawing a face, I want this ellipse to be smack in the center of the canvas and pretty big. I'll type 4 numbers in that'll make that happen, and we'll explore why they work. Ta-da!
So I'll launch the poll for you. Which video do you think has the best technical quality? Which one has the best educational value? And which one is the most engaging? Just very shortly, just small. And I have to ask my host now, do I end the poll and you share it, or do you end it as well?
As you prefer, I can end it and share it.
Okay, perfect. Because you see the results coming in as well, huh?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, so if we have, 90% of people answering.
So maybe another 8 seconds for whoever wants to. Okay, I'm ending the poll now.
So very interesting to see that the most engaging video might not have been the best educational value video, according to you. I hope that in the next 5 or 10 minutes or so, I can explain to you that educational value and most engaging are actually one and the same, of the same concept. Oh, do you see it already, Noah? Or do you?
We still see the video.
Do you see the results now?
Yes.
We saw them, but they went away again. We see them. It's okay.
Sorry, I have multiple screens and I don't want to stop sharing my slides.
Today,
No.
Today, to achieve that.
So In the previous section, let's stop sharing the results. Yes. In the previous section, I talked about how two sensor modalities, hearing and seeing, could reduce the mental load of learners and make them learn better. Mental load during learning is an important concept, and it's connected to engagement and to learning. Too much mental load and learners get frustrated, too little and learners give up or think that they already know everything. So it's very important to get the right balance there. You can represent mental load as a U-curve, an upside down U-curve, where you see that if we have too little mental load, then, well, we fall asleep. If you have too much, you have too much stress. Engagement level can increase the mental load a bit. Technical quality can increase it so much that if the technical quality is really bad, you experience a lot of stress because you have to strain too much to listen or to see whatever is happening. The multimodal format of video, so hearing and seeing, can lower the mental load towards the area where it's optimal for learning. But unfortunately, not all video is good. Sometimes video makes you fall asleep, or sometimes video just increases the stress and also doesn't make you end up in the good area of mental load. So by focusing on mental load and balancing mental load, we will arrive at several guidelines for video lectures. And these guidelines cover 3 categories: slide design, segmenting videos, and lecture scenario, or the structure of your lecture. And in balancing the mental load, first of all, we need to focus on only those activities that help us learn. Now, that may seem very trivial, but very often we see design choices in education that are detrimental to learning because they just make people do the wrong thing. Like, for example, a slide like this. This is just too much information, and my activity as a learner would be to search for the relevant information instead of learn or otherwise process the relevant information. Also here, we do have the relevant information presented on the slide, but the talking head next to the slide makes us probably focus on the talking head only and attract our attention away from what we need to be doing, and that is focus on the slide that he's presenting. Sometimes teachers don't specify the learning goals in the beginning of a lecture, which leaves us as a learner searching for the meaning or the learning goals of any lecture. Therefore, our guidelines are for slides that you present clean slides without any clutter, no talking heads, and no distracting elements like different colors and contrast elements or moving elements. We guide the learner's attention towards the relevant information on the slides, like we can see here by pointing towards the relevant information, and Matthew will show you more examples of that. We saw in the tutorial of the girl just now that the attention was guided by her typing, so we were all reading with her. It could be a bit too slow, but still. And because we want our student not to be looking for the learning goals of the lecture, we also communicate the learning goals early in our lecture. So now we've removed all the visual and auditory cues that lead to irrelevant activities that do not contribute to learning. We can now focus on how we present relevant information and get learners to behave in ways that actually aid their learning. What we want is that learners become active. Now, I'm not talking about doing it themselves or discovering anything. What I'm talking about is that learner process or reflect on the information that you as a teacher present to them. The learners should compare it or contrast it with things that they already know, or they should search their memory for some previous model that they learned and is relevant for understanding whatever new things you're explaining at that moment. That's the mental activity we would like the learner to engage in, because that type of processing is thought to lead to the creation of more and new elaborate knowledge in their long-term memory. So how can we make sure that learners pay attention in these effortful and engage in these effortful learning activities during your video lecture? Well, because we have to take into account that normally you would be speaking at about a rate of 125 words per minute, whereas your audience can listen to just about 400 words per minute, and they can read about 200 words per minute. So they might be easily distracted if they have to wait for you to talk about what you want to talk about, especially when you have a lot of information on your slides, like text on your slides, and reading the text on the slide actually interferes with listening to that same text that you're verbalizing. Therefore, we always recommend that you put as little text or no text as possible on your slide. So do not print apples are fruit and say apples are fruit, because that's redundant and just causes more mental load and interference. Rather, just show the picture and talk about what you want to talk about. So little or no text on the slide as a third recommendation. Another measure to activate learners' engagement with whatever you're talking about is to ask them a question at the beginning of your lecture. That question will, probably, there's a screen pop up now, but you don't see it? You don't see it, right?
No.
Okay.
No, we don't.
I'll just continue with what I was talking about. So we ask a question to the learner at the beginning of the lecture to activate the prior knowledge that the learner has on a specific topic. What this does is that it brings all the knowledge that the learner has on the subject to the forefront, and that helps him understand any new elements that you're talking about and to comprehend them and understand them in larger chunks and integrate them in what he already knows about the subject. So starting your lecture scenario with an intro question is a very good way to do that. So far, we talked about mental load and learning, and we came up with some guidelines for slide design and your lecture scenario. And some of our guidelines, such as including an intro question, aim to increase the mental load to enhance the learning outcome. And some guidelines, such as having clean slides or communicate the learning goals, aim to decrease the mental load and to improve learning. So these are the guidelines that decrease mental load, and here we have a guideline that increases mental load to increase the engagement with your lecture. Now, another option to increase the engagement with your lectures is to increase variability in learning. Variability in the activities that learners have to do, or variability in the content that you present, or variability in the format that you choose. If learners experience more variability, they have more opportunities to compare and contrast and search their memory for their knowledge on the topic. And that just increases, that it creates richer and more elaborate representations of the information that you are presenting to them. Now, what would that look like? How can you increase your variability in your lectures? One way is to segment your lecture, and Matthew will talk about segmenting a little more later on, into separate videos, and interleave these videos with other activities such as forum discussions or quizzes, reading tasks, or reviews of earlier materials, or doing exercises. Another way to increase the variability is to record several worked out examples, what I was talking about before, of the same problem, but then with different strategies to solve the problem. This will enrich the learner's mental representation of that problem. It's like when you know more routes between your home and your office, and thus have a more detailed mental map of the whole environment. And that's more detailed, richer mental representation of the problem, how to get from home to office, but also, you know, to how to solve a certain mathematical problem. That more detailed and richer representation makes the memory for it stronger because more detail is stored. And it also allows you to solve different types of problems more easily. So it makes you more versatile to tackle different types of problems. It works twofold.
And I still see the active learning slide. I don't know if others have seen other slides, but for me it was blocked.
Let me just track you back real quickly. So I said that an intro question would allow the learners to remember everything that they already know on the subject, and thus any new information that you bring is better stored, more easily stored. That's why I said we have a guideline that says start your lecture with an intro question. Then I showed you that we have measures to decrease the mental load by no clutter, no text, guide attention and communicate the goals before you start with the lecture. We also have measures that say we increase the mental load for the learner because that brings them to a higher load that's in the zone of optimal learning, to prevent them from falling asleep or being too boring. And then I started talking about another way to increase the mental load is increasing variability in your lectures, in the content and in the form of providing a lecture. And I ended saying that you could have these worked out examples where you record, for example, because you can integrate all these little exercises in between lectures. That increases the variability a bit, but you could also just record several strategies to solve the same problem. And that brings a richer, more elaborate mental representation of the content. And similarly to learning, you know, more routes from your home to your office, that will contribute to you having a more elaborate mental representation of your environment. That increased level of detail makes you remember the whole content better, and it also makes you more versatile to tackle multiple different types of problems. Like when you know more routes, you know that you have to, you know that if there's a roadblock somewhere, you can go a different way. So that's the benefit of increasing variability for learning, both in form and in content. So again, what I was talking about, maybe a bit too much now, people falling asleep, but mental load, I think, is really in the center of the learning value of educational videos. And when we were looking at the two other videos that I showed before, the one from CS50, the Harvard guy explaining in front of the whole audience how you can code certain things, and then the tutorial where we could look with the girl as she was typing specific code and she was explaining what she was doing and why she was doing it. I think both have a certain engagement value and both have a certain learning value because they both give us examples, worked out examples, but both are very different, as I'm sure that all of your videos will be different as well, depending on whether you record them in your lecture hall or in your in the privacy of your own home. My idea is try to, even if you are using video, so you cannot get the feedback from learners right away and you cannot really know whether they're engaged enough, whether they're in their green zone or not, try to follow the guidelines to be more, to have a higher chance of at least ending up in this green zone of mental load that offers the optimal learning value for your students. And now Matthew will take over to discuss do it yourself. And I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just share my screen and go into presentation mode. Okay, everyone see the slides? Excellent. Right. I've just had a coffee, so I could blast through these slides at ultra fast speed, but I'll try and slow myself down and take a bit of time to work my way through. Okay, so the do-it-yourself section. So Anne has walked us through the why, the what, and the how of using videos in online learning. And as I said, it's time for the do-it-yourself section. When we're considering doing it yourself for videos, there are many things to think about and lots of things to take into consideration. And so the objective of my part of this presentation is to talk a bit about some of the things to think about. So we'll start off by very quickly looking at just the 3 steps of making a video. And those 3 steps are the preparation step, the recording step, and the editing step. Arguably, the most important phase in this process is the preparation phase. It's here that really all of the planning of your material and how you're going to go about delivering this material, that's where all the work is done. And in this process, this is really where you lay out the foundations of everything that you're going to be recording and editing later on. And so more time spent here is going to make this recording and editing process just that little bit more smoother and easier. And this is very much true of just video production in general, really. Whether you're making a large feature film, there's still an immense amount of preparation that goes into those, but there's also a lot of preparation that should go into recording video lectures, and also recording video lectures with the idea of after the editing, kind of translating those into videos that would work well in a kind of online educational format. And so it's at this stage that I would really love to present you with a nice complete list of all of the check boxes that you need to tick off to have guaranteed educational success with all of your videos. But unfortunately, this list doesn't really exist. It's because, as Anne was covering in the previous video, there are many different types of video. They're all delivered by different speakers for different purposes to present different kinds of information. And so there's no real kind of formula for one-size-fits-all formula for making great and effective educational videos. But having said that, there are some general things to think about and to take into consideration that we've noticed at the Centre for Digital Education, since we've been making educational videos now for a few years. And we've picked up on some of these general things to think about before and during this COVID pandemic, and we'll run through some of those now. So, key things to think about. During the preparation phase, an important thing to think about is the structure of your lectures. So what do I mean by that? So let's take a look at an example of a lecture here. So the whole lecture, typically this would run for 45 minutes plus. Now, this isn't ideal having massive long videos like this included in online courses and things like that. It's quite a lot of mental load, and as Anne was saying, quite a lot of stress for the learners if they have to sit in front of computers all day, every day, and there's quite a lot of content to take in. So what we would recommend is to structure your lectures in ways that you can break them up into different sections. Now, these sections would ideally be between 10 and 15 minutes in length to kind of to help cover one subject, but not so long that it's overwhelming for whoever's watching. Now, why do we say to break up lectures? What's the point in all of this? So it's for 2 main reasons. And first of all, we're going to have a look at just a little bit of research, or present one principle from some research that has been done on media for the purposes of learning. All of this body of research was put together into a number of different principles, and one of these principles is the segmenting principle. And this principle dictates that people learn more deeply when a multimedia message is presented in learner-paced segments rather than as a continuous unit. And yes, I did just read that off a piece of paper. I don't know it by heart. So The idea of this is that by sectioning out parts of your lecture and having these as individual kind of bite-sized pieces of content that people can watch online, the learners are able to advance through this content at their own pace, so they fully understand the ideas, the concepts, and the information that you're presenting in those sections before they move on to the next section. So there's the segmenting principle, but then another reason for breaking up these recorded lectures into shorter chunks is when they get put online onto online platforms, then it becomes easier to interleave exercises and extra content in between these sections. So you have your different parts of the lecture here. You can create space in which, as I say, to put in those exercises, extra reading, information, assessments, assignments, etc., etc. And this is all to allow for a more rich and deeper learning experience when people are consuming this information in an online environment. Then what kind of things do you need to take into consideration when structuring lectures? For this, we'll take a look at an individual section. And as with all good stories, there is a beginning, a middle, and an end. At the beginning of a section, it's a good idea, as Anne was saying previously in her presentation, to appear on screen, present the learning objectives, and also kind of prime your students for the lesson that's going to be taking place by asking some preliminary questions, getting them to guess the answers to some things that they might not necessarily know the answers to. Then it's time to jump into your content, your learning material. And here again, we're paying close attention to all of the points that Anne was saying in terms of slide design, not putting too much mental load on the students as they're following along with your material, not too much information on the slide, and presenting information in a clear and concise way, so it's nice and easy for your learners to follow along with what's being said. Then finally, at the end of each section, we suggest you do a kind of brief summary of what has been covered, maybe address and answer the questions that you proposed at the beginning using the methods and techniques that you taught in the section itself. And then it's also a good idea to present, to leave space for a kind of question and answer session during the actual recording of the lecture. And the idea of having this question and answer section at the end of a part of the lecture is so that you're not interrupting the recording process as you're working through the slides. As I said before, these sections are only going to be kind of 10 to 15 minutes in length, so it's not too long for the students in the lecture hall or tuning in online to kind of sit on their hands for a minute and wait to ask the questions. So now that you have all of these different sections to lectures covering individual topics, like what's the purpose? What is the benefit of doing this? Well, these sections can then get used in a variety of different ways. So first of all, they could be used as standalone resources. For example, as revision material for students who want to go back and quickly look at a part of a lecture, part of a course, just in time for their exams. Another option is obviously a kind of standard online format where you have each section interleaved with exercises, more information, assignments, etc., etc. Then there's also the flipped classroom format. You can present each of these sections in a kind of batch where they have to watch this content before they come in, and then whilst they're on campus with you, you can use that time for doing exercises and activities to kind of reinforce the learning that they would have taken on board during the watching of the videos. And it's also good for kind of recall of information, because they would have had to have watched that material, understood it to some degree, and then later on, either that day or that week, come back onto campus and then remember all the information that was covered during those lectures as well. So recalling of information is really good with flipped classroom format. Now, how? So there are a few different things to think about with the technicalities of going about recording lectures in this way. So first of all, there's technically how to go about recording. Then there's also how to go about guiding students' attention, which might not be as obvious as one might think initially. And then also ways to include interactivity. Obviously, you've got students on campus with you, or maybe tuning in live or watching pre-recorded materials. So it's good to include some level of interactivity with each of those different sets of students. We'll cover briefly how to go in introducing interactivity in those three situations. So technically, how to record. This is a lecture in and of itself. So here you're thinking about equipment, you're thinking about software. So rather than dive into the nitty-gritty details of all of this now, because simply don't have time, I would refer you to the Flexible Teaching website. The link is on the slide there. And here we have a whole mass of information on getting set up for hybrid teaching in various different scenarios. We've got quick start guides for recording for equipment, so how to go about setting up your equipment, and also the kind of equipment and software that you need for different scenarios, as well as some quick start guides for recording on home or from campus, and that'll walk you through those procedures there, and that'll go into a lot more detail than I can right now. So we'll skip ahead to the next bit. So guiding students' attention. So here we're going back to these principles of multimedia and calling upon another principle, which is the signaling principle. And this signaling principle dictates that people learn more deeply from a multimedia message when cues are added that highlight the organization of essential material. Okay, and for me, there's kind of three different levels of signaling that we can break this down into. So there's the simple level of signaling, and this is kind of what I've been employing throughout this presentation. Hopefully it's worked. Let me know if it hasn't in the question and answer session. But this is kind of presenting static graphics on screen at the appropriate time for when you're talking about a specific piece of information on the slide. So this could be, as I've done there with the green ellipse around a word for highlighting a piece of information, or it could also be using color to good effect for drawing the eye of your students to a relevant piece of information. A moderate level of signaling, this could be the use of laser pointers, maybe not a laser pointer as powerful as this one, but I'll turn mine on. I haven't been using it, I forgot to turn it on at the beginning. So this kind of moderate level of signaling is introducing a bit of movement, subtle movement, to draw the eyes of your learners and students to a relevant part of the slide. But we could also, count in this moderate levels of signaling some very simple animations as well. Again, just to draw the eye of the student to the relevant part of the slide. Then, complex level of learning. Complex level of signaling. This would be including things like annotating on slides. So here, you would be writing out each section of, for example, an equation, or working through examples in real time as you're writing out. And this is a really great way of guiding your learners step by step through some of the more complicated ideas and subjects that you might be covering during your course. Now, each of these different levels of signaling, some are more ideal for different use cases. So, for example, simple level of signaling and moderate level of signaling would be pretty appropriate when you're recording with students in an auditorium with you, but also if you have students tuning in online to watch a live lecture being recorded. So simple level of signaling might, if it was just a live audience, a live auditorium with students, then you could simply point to a region of the slide when you're talking about it to draw their attention to that specific part. But obviously, if you've got people tuning in online, then it might not be easy for them to see exactly what you're pointing about. So including signaling directly on the slides as they're being presented, as they're being shared to everybody at the same time, is probably a more effective way of going about signaling. Then for complex signaling, this is probably not your best option if you're doing live recordings of lectures, simply because the process of writing things out, taking your time to clearly annotate slides and clearly write information down is, as I say, a time-consuming process, and it's better done for pre-recorded lectures where that writing can get sped up during the editing process. So, as I mentioned before, who are you signaling to? There are the three different audiences that you're presenting to: the students in the lecture hall, the students tuning in live with live streams, and the students watching recorded content. Then, finally, we're going to have a look at some ways of including some interactivity. Again, you're going to want to bear in mind who you're presenting to at this time. So whether it's in the lecture hall, live streams, or watching pre-recorded content. With interactivity, obviously a very important thing to take into consideration is time. Who's watching you real time whilst you're recording, or is it a piece of content that people are going to be watching recorded later? And different kinds of interactivity are used for those two different situations. So obviously kind of real-time interaction at the time of recording during a lecture is obviously going to rule out students interacting when they're watching recorded materials, but we'll deal with them later. So in terms of interacting with people that are tuning in live, you want to think about chat assistants. So people, somebody who is going to help you manage the chat that's happening with the online streaming, like in a Zoom call or Zoom recording. So as I said when we were dividing up the lectures into sections, it's good to include a question and answer session at the end, just again so we don't interrupt that recording process. And during this question and answer session, you want a teaching assistant or someone to help moderate that chat to see the questions that are coming in, and then at the question and answer session to really to voice those questions to the teacher, because obviously it's very important for online students to still have that opportunity to be involved and to participate in the lecture, whether that's answering questions or taking part in some kind of activity. Then there's also some tools, interactive tools to encourage interaction for both people in the auditorium and also online. And the EPFL has a variety of solutions from Turning Point. And on here you can run polls, put up questionnaires, multiple choice questions, and then this with the idea of promoting discussion and seeing if everybody's following along with what you're presenting. Then what about interaction for students watching recorded content? So these, there's obviously going to be exercises and activities that come after the video in a kind of online course format. And so this is one form of interaction on some way with the learning material. But then it's also a good idea during the actual video recording and whilst you're presenting your content, as we said, for example, at the introduction, to pose questions to your students. And there is some research as well to show that even students guessing answers, even if they guess incorrectly, provided they're given the correct answer afterwards, this can help with information retention. And so, asking them, getting them engaged, switched on, and already kind of accessing that kind of prior knowledge and gearing them up and getting them ready for receiving and thinking about the information that you're covering in your lectures is a really good way for interacting with them on some kind of temporarily unaligned situation, for want of a better phrase. Okay, so I think that is, thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate that we ran through quite a lot of information in not a lot of time, and so I think we'll open up for some question and answers, and I hope that all made some kind of sense for some of you.